Boldwood presents One Wish in Manhattan, written by Mandy Baggot and read by Miranda. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. McDonald's, Winchester Street, Salisbury, Wiltshire, UK. Hayley Walker had quit her job. She had quit her job! What had she been thinking? Escape was the answer to that one. Finally ridding herself of sweaty Greg and his desperate attempts to fold and press her at the dry cleaning firm. But now, an hour after the deed had been done, she was starting to realise she should have thought a lot less about escape and a lot more about money. Or rather her lack of it. And exactly what she was going to do after Christmas. Throwing in the towel had been a knee-jerk reaction. A desperate leap. Was she going to live to regret it? Part-time party planning wasn't going to bring home the bacon or the expensive cereal with the free books. "Do they have Yorkshire puddings?" Hayley looked up from her phone tapping and faced her 9-year-old daughter, the eater of the expensive cereal with the free books. Angel had half a cheeseburger hanging out of her mouth, and she was trying to ram in the straw of her Diet Coke, too. Hayley hadn't heard exactly what she'd said, something about pudding. She was too busy wondering if she had time to search the job section of the local paper before they left the country, whilst also running through the whole travel itinerary in her head. Bang went her hopes of new clothes for them both for this trip. What was going to be on trend this winter? She'd never really believed in the tweed phase. Maybe, if she didn't sleep, she would have time to make alterations on what they did have in their wardrobes. She put the lid on her thought box and focused on Angel. "Angel, manners in a restaurant, please." Hayley pulled the cardboard cup away. She watched Angel's eyes spiral upwards, then around, taking in every inch of the McDonald's. No matter what her daughter's look was saying, it was a restaurant. Serviettes made it so. And it was the only restaurant Hayley could afford right now. Even more so after today. She sighed. This McDonald's was their place, mum and daughter bonding over burgers. It was a constant, familiar, and familiar was comforting when she was about to throw them both halfway across the world. "Well, you haven't answered my question." Angel exaggerated the words for all she was worth. "Are they going to have Yorkshire puddings in New York?" Hayley put her phone on the table. She didn't know the answer, but it was obviously important to Angel. More important to her daughter than the fact she had never been on an aeroplane before, and she had to sit still for 8 hours, and she was about to discover a whole new country. Who would have thought Yorkshire puddings could be so critical? "I don't know," Hayley said, "but I can find out." She smiled at her daughter. "Google it," Angel came back. "What, now?" "Free Wi-Fi, McDonald's. You always say that." Angel sucked at her drink, eyes bulbous like marbles. At the moment, there was nothing better than free. A bubble of pride bounced off Hayley's insides. She watched Angel biting down on the straw with her perfect teeth, her cheeks a little reddened, her mousy brown hair set in 2 pigtails, with tinsel woven into the bobbles. Angel was the best thing she'd ever done. The only real, satisfying thing she'd achieved, and she'd done it, for the most part, on her own. She swallowed down a knot of emotion and sucked at her own drink. "I can't wait to meet Uncle Dean's new boyfriend," Angel said. Hayley started to choke on the liquid in her mouth and dragged the straw out. Her phone fell out of her hand and into the cardboard tray of chips she hadn't touched yet. "What?" "We Skyped last week, when you were staring at those forms on the internet for hours." Angel was right. All Hayley had done the past few weeks was fill in forms. She thought she needed a visitor's visa. From what she'd read, it would have been easier to send them the blood of a unicorn and spoilers for the next season of Game of Thrones. If only someone had mentioned Esther to her before her head had got so close to exploding. New York, a Christmas holiday to Angel, and an important mission to Hayley. She had spent the past 2 months straining her eyes to burning point on late-night internet searches. Now it was time for the hunt to get up close and personal. Hayley swung her attention back to Angel. He's called Vernon. Vern for short, and they met at some really cool party Uncle Dean got invited to. Angel flicked one of her pigtails. Will we get to go to really cool parties? Hayley's mind was working overtime. Her brother had a new boyfriend he hadn't mentioned. Did they do Yorkshire puddings in America? Could she get hold of a unicorn? Luggage scales. She definitely needed to get some luggage scales. She had no full-time job. I don't know, Angel. We're going to have a lot to do when we get there, and that's pretty close to a yes. Are you going to finish that burger? Are you going to eat your chips? Angel put her tongue into the bottom of her mouth and poked it forward, tilting her chin. You know that making that face is like swearing in America, Hayley warned. Angel changed her expression and looked at her mother with only slight scepticism. Hayley pointed a finger and grinned. Gotcha! That's not fair! Angel screeched. She reached across the table and stole a chip from Hayley's tray, popping it into her mouth. Hayley smiled, picking up a chip herself and dunking it in ketchup. Fries were about as uncomplicated as you could get. Hayley looked out of the window onto the street. It was already dark, the sky blue-black with menacing grey clouds converging above the city skyline. People were wrapped up in wool coats, passing by, rushing home from work or to late-night shopping, their breath visible in the freezing air. In just a few days, she and Angel would be leaving it all behind and travelling thousands of miles across the ocean for Christmas in the Big Apple. Minus temperatures in double figures and streets full of Santas, Michael Bublé music and candy canes. Hayley watched a woman pushing open the door of the restaurant, and she reached forward across the table to tap Angel on the arm. Fashion alert at 3 o'clock. Hayley made the tapping more insistent. Angel Walker, tell me what you would do for this woman with nothing but a scarf and a hair clip. Oh, Mum, really? Angel looked at the woman heading for the counter. I think she looks fine. Please. Cream boots with that grey coat? Angel sighed. What colour is the imaginary scarf? Hayley grinned. What colour do you think the imaginary scarf should be? Red? Hayley shook her head, screwing up her face in disapproval. Brown? One last go. She watched her daughter look the woman up and down, assessing. Spots! Angel exclaimed. Hayley clapped her hands together. Yes, I'm thinking a bit of Dalmatian print, clipped onto that coat like a drape. She would go from faux pas to fashionista in a second. Are we going to tell her? Angel asked. Hayley laughed and shook her head. No. It was just a game now. Something to occupy the designer side of her brain. It was all she'd ever wanted. Making creations to grace the catwalks, seeing the clothes come to life, delivering the finished products to high-end stores all over the world. She swallowed as she looked back at Angel. It seemed like a lifetime ago. And it was. Her life had changed beyond recognition. She'd gone from spending her nights cutting up fabric and laughing with friends over bottles of Lambrini to night feeds and nappy changing. The only fashion she'd ended up dictating was her baby girls, despite attempts to pass off puke stains as en vogue. She'd chosen to become a mother, and mothers made sacrifices. What else was there to say? Vernon has a dog called Randy, Angel blurted out, interrupting her thoughts. A chip lodged in her throat and Hayley had to cough. What? I think he named him after that judge on American Idol. Hayley sighed. Let's hope so. Balmoral Road, Salisbury, Wiltshire, UK. Angel had sung the Michael Bolton version of Santa Claus is Coming to Town on repeat since they'd left town. Now they were parked up, and the song was just reaching its final crescendo. Usually Hayley would have joined in. She had almost perfected the hair flick and the high, gruff voice. But she was still panicking about the amount she had to do before they left. It helped that she didn't have a job to maintain anymore. How wrong did that sound? Giving in to the first drink with manager Greg had been her biggest mistake. Him not taking no for an answer the second, third and 12th time of asking couldn't be put on her, but the getting too close beside the dry-cleaning steam machine had been the last straw. Fondling business suits and stain-covered cocktail dresses for 6 months was definitely enough. Her options were now open, which would have scared her more had she not been squirreling away money from a second job as a party planner. Things had been busy on the run-up to Christmas. She'd even scored some extra cash, giving some of her richer clients fashion advice. With a clear diary for next year, and just enough funds to cover this trip, she could now concentrate on what was important: the search. Hayley screwed her eyes tight shut and gripped onto the steering wheel. Despite her bravado with Angel, she was excited and terrified in equal measure about this trip. In the far corners of her mind, heightened by the fact she was now unemployed, this trip to New York had all the makings of an escape plan. It could be a chance to see how the land lay over there, how Angel took to the US life. Her throat tightened just thinking about it. She and Angel, starting afresh, new horizons, donuts the size of dinner plates, and cruising every floor of Barney's. Hayley opened her eyes. It would only be window shopping for now, with her finances as they were. She looked at Angel. Her daughter had pulled down the visor and was pouting to herself in the vanity mirror, like she was about to pose for a selfie. Unfortunately, Hayley wasn't like her ridiculously clever brother Dean, who had been headhunted for his position with Drummond Global. She had no extraordinary skills to offer the US, just a hard work ethic and, well, just that. She and millions of others were all looking for the same sort of change. New York paved with gold, a concrete jungle where dreams could come true. "Shall I put it on again?" Angel had turned in her seat and was now looking at Hayley, her finger poised on the button of the in-car CD player. "No, not again." Angel let out a laugh that made Hayley's skin prickle. Right now her daughter seemed innocent and unburdened, but Hayley knew better. She knew what Angel was thinking and hoping for before she went to sleep each night, and she was going to do whatever it took to solve it. New York could hold answers for them both. "Come on, let's go and show Nanny your new coat," Hayley said, opening the car door. She stepped out of the car and shut the door, putting her hands into the pockets of her coat. The trees on the street cast dark shadows against the orange glow of the streetlights. Frost was starting to coat the windscreens of the parked cars, and half a dozen houses had flashing and blinking Christmas lights on their brickwork or hanging from their eaves. Outlines of decorated Christmas trees were just visible behind net curtains, and Hayley sucked in the quiet of the English suburb, turning her attention to a cat jumping up onto a neighbouring fence. Her whole landscape was about to change for a couple of weeks. Was she ready for all that could bring? She watched Angel run up the path, the bag containing the new bright red duffel coat clutched in her hand. Hayley took another moment, leaning back against the car and surveying the house she'd grown up in. It hadn't changed in 28 years. The small black iron gate was still half off its hinges, the grass trimmed neat but the rose bushes overgrown. It was a hodgepodge, some things working, other bits uncared for. It had been a little like that with the people inside. Dean had been thoroughly nurtured, was still cared about. She had been left to garner weeds. For someone relatively self-sufficient, it hadn't been a problem until she got pregnant and her dad died. The cold wound itself around her and she internally shook. She didn't resent her brother. She loved him with every fibre of her being. But as soon as Angel had come along, things had deteriorated. Her mother just didn't look at her the same way. There were awkward silences, guarded help, emotional detachment. Rita had been there for her in every practical way possible, but that was where it ended. Money and advice had been handed out rather than love and support. Even now it still felt a bit hollow. "Mum," Angel called. "Nanny says if you don't come in now, I'll have to shut the door. It's letting all the heat out." Hayley rolled her eyes and braced herself. She had to be positive, smile, and, most important of all, not mention that she'd lost her job. "Red? I thought you were going to get a pink. You said you were going to get a pink." Rita Walker didn't hold back. Hayley watched her mother turn her head, directing hard eyes her way. Angel stopped twirling around and stood still, Her arms held out stiff like an insulted scarecrow. The joy in her new coat instantly shattering at Rita's remark. We tried on 9 coats in 8 different shops. Angel liked this one, and to be honest, I was losing the will to live by then, Hayley responded. Why did she always feel like she had to defend all her decisions? She slumped down onto the sofa, just missing a pile of home and country magazines. Why her mother had ever signed up for that monthly subscription she would never know. Their home was, and always had been, far more Britain's worst than Downton Abbey. You gave up, you mean? Rita sniffed. Made do. She reached forward, picking up her fine bone china teacup with the chip on the rim. Hayley nodded. It was a bargain, too. She pitched her voice just right. Nothing like a charity shop bargain. She had never seen her mother move faster. She was up and out of her reclining chair, quicker than a fighter jet taking flight. Take it off, Angel! Rita tugged at the sleeve of the coat, shaking the girl's arm in the process. Quickly! Nanny, you're hurting! Mum, stop, I was joking. Angel wrenched her arm back and hugged herself. Rita turned her body to Hayley, then settled herself in an angry stance. Why would you say something like that? Why would you go on about it needing to be pink? Hayley watched Angel clamp her hands over her ears. She'd been backed into a corner again. Rita was good at that, but it was unfair for Angel to be caught in the middle. They had a couple of nights staying here because the landlord was redecorating their house while they were away, and the firm needed to start early. She should try and maintain peace and tranquility and ignore the jibes directed her way. It wasn't as if she wasn't completely accustomed to it by now. Shall I make a pot of tea? Hayley offered, getting to her feet. I've made a shepherd's pie. Angel, you must be starving, Rita said. Oh, we've had dinner already, Angel replied, spinning around again. Oh? Rita queried. Hayley practically ran for the kitchen, waiting for the words to come from Angel's mouth. We went to McDonald's. Hayley could almost feel the temperature drop. Just 2 more sleeps. 2 more sleeps, and they'd be heading for America. Chapter 2. Drummond Global Offices. Downtown Manhattan, USA. Oliver Drummond let his eyes wander. Mackenzie, the head of his legal division, had her voice pitched at boring the second she opened her scarlet lips. Settlement, management, negotiation, collaboration. And his very least favourite, strategize. Strategizing wasn't in his nature. He was a doer. He acted instinctively, and more often than not, impulsively. He didn't mull things over. That's what he paid other people to do. By the time his employees had strategized the ass out of everything, all that was left for him to do was give the green light. He wanted the finish line, the winning touchdown. He had no interest in the bits in between. Creation and completion were his fortes. And if people had a problem with that mantra, well, they knew what they could do. Oliver turned his head back to the dozen or so people sat at the boardroom table on the 80th floor of Drummond Global and nodded at Mackenzie. He had no idea what she'd said, but he was confident in her ability to get the company out of whatever mess she'd been called in to deal with. He'd make an effort to find out. He should know, if only the bare bones of it. He put the end of his steel ballpoint in his mouth, pressing it to his lip. He'd been so focused on the globe over the past few months, he'd let everything else slide. The globe was going to change things. The tablet wasn't just going to alter the lives of its consumers. It was going to reinvigorate his passion for the company. And he'd get right into the professional zone on other projects today, as soon as he'd got rid of last night's hangover. He was blaming his best friend Tony for every last shot of that. He shifted in his executive leather chair at the head of the table, as a twinge pinged like an elastic band in his chest. He gritted his teeth together, trying to ignore it. He didn't have time for this. He would not allow it to exist in his world. He turned his head to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Manhattan. Snow was falling, spreading its whiteness over the tops of neighbouring buildings, raining down towards the ground. He focused his hazel eyes on the flakes, watching their journey until they disappeared out of sight. Right now, he wanted to be one of them, weightless, drifting, silently floating through the air, oblivious to anything around. A layer of white hung from the neo-Gothic roof of the Woolworth building, while shards of ice dripped from what he could see of the frontage of Broadway. Outside, the city was turning into a winter wonderland. Inside, there was an avalanche waiting to happen. The distraction of the winter weather wasn't enough. The pain was still there. It was an ache that seemed to increase in magnitude with every passing second. He fought the urge to grimace, holding his jaw in place as the monotony of Mackenzie's voice continued in the background. It could definitely be muscular. Maybe he'd pulled something when he was working out. And how crazy were those dance moves Tony had forced him to do last night? He swallowed, putting a hand to the dark grey tie at his throat, slackening it off a little. Oliver! The direct tone and the force at which his name hit his eardrums drew his attention back to the table. Clara, his PA, was giving him one of her special looks. The eyebrows are up in her mahogany-tinted hairline, her head tilting downwards, glasses sat halfway down her nose, shoulder pads widening. He'd just about deciphered this look to mean, "Get your head back in the room now, or I'm going to quit." Somehow, she knew that scared the crap out of him. Oliver adjusted his body in the chair as another shot of pain hit his chest wall. This wasn't good. Was this how it started? No. He needed to banish that thought from his mind, just like he had all the other times this had happened. He wasn't his father. He wasn't his brother. This was not touching him. He swallowed. He didn't believe that. He was always going to be next. He directed his gaze to the brassy statement necklace, laying just above Clara's 50-something décolletage. It paid homage to everything that was bad about the 80s. Where did she get these things? A smile broke on his lips. This was good. Focusing on Clara's poor taste in accessories was really working. He leaned a little nearer to her, ignoring the thud of his heart and the perspiration at the back of his neck. Then, the reflective fake diamonds started to blur his vision. He tipped slightly, nudging Clara's elbow with his hand. The paper she was holding fanned to the floor in spectacular fashion. Mackenzie stopped talking. Oliver straightened up quickly, blinking desperately. His face, coated with an expression he hoped signalled solidarity and comradeship. He nodded his head as Clara dipped to recover her documents from the carpet. Oliver cleared his throat before speaking. "Do carry on, Mackenzie." "What was going on in there, Oliver? If I wasn't old enough to be your mother, I'd have thought you were trying to hit on me," Clara said as they headed from the boardroom. "I apologise. I was bored and I couldn't look at Mackenzie. She's hankering after another date, and the last time I took her out, she dragged me under the table." Clara turned and looked at him, wearing the school principal expression. I know, I'm done mixing business with pleasure," he stated. "So, you're confident you know everything there is to know about the proposed takeover of Regis Software?" The long strides he was taking meant she was following him at running pace along the corridor. Deftly he swept left, heading towards the bank of elevators. He needed to get back to his office, take a breath. He paced with urgency. Before remembering Clara could barely walk in her shoes at the best of times, he slowed. "I kick-started the project, Clara. My father and Andrew Regis weren't just old friends, they were like brothers. He came to every birthday party I ever had, until I got too old for clowns and piñatas." He stopped, pressing the stainless steel button to call the lift. He tried to hide the bob of his Adam's apple. He had no idea of the latest content in the Regis Software contract. He had set it up. He had banged out the basics of the agreement. What had happened then? It was nowhere near the final stages, was it? What exactly had he missed? "So, bearing that in mind, after dinner and drinks you decide to ship out?" Clara had her bluntest tone on now. If he didn't know her background already, he would have guessed at prison officer. Oliver filled his lungs to their maximum capacity and turned to look at her. "I don't know, Clara. Has something happened I don't know about? You're my PA. If you know something, then it's your duty to tell me." She adopted a confused expression as she looked back at him. "I don't know anything." "Then I ask the question. Am I not CEO of Drummond Global?" Who is he trying to sound like here? Donald Trump? King Midas? He watched Clara swallow away her resolve. She did a good job. No, scrub that. She did a great job. So why was he intent on making her feel small in this moment? He moved his tongue in his mouth and swallowed away the bitter taste. He was attacking, fighting instead of fleeing, because she'd backed him into a corner. If he wasn't careful, he would lose his edge. "I'm not my father, Clara." He stopped talking, the breath suddenly catching in his throat. He tried again. "And I don't need to get involved in every minute decision there is. It's a more modern approach." "I'm well aware of all that, Oliver." Clara paused before carrying on. "I'm worried about you, that's all." "Please, don't do that." He moistened his lips. The pain was back now, only a lot worse. His heart was beating like the core of a military band. He could no longer fill his lungs. Breaths were coming short and sharp. He tried to recover. I don't pay you to worry about me." A vice-like grip wrapped itself around his heart and squeezed, unrelenting. Where was the damn elevator? The steel of the lift door just in front of him started to warp and bend in his vision. The internal glass windows to his left and right bowed and refracted the morning sun hitting the buildings from behind them. The walkway was suddenly getting sauna hot. "Oliver, are you all right?" He opened his mouth to speak, but his jaw was tightening. Everything was being squashed and compacted like garbage in a city truck. "Oliver," Clara repeated. The words he wanted to say just wouldn't come. Clara's necklace spun around in his vision, and before he could do anything else, his body dropped to the floor. Chapter 3. Balmoral Road, Salisbury, Wiltshire, UK. I met someone last night at this really cool club called Vipers. Michel de Vos. An artist. He looked a bit like Johnny Depp, and he was foreign too. Exotic. I think Dean would probably fancy him. We danced and talked, and he told me all about his paintings and photographs. He's going to be exhibiting at these cool galleries, New York Life and the Tilton. New York is giving me all these completely amazing opportunities. You just don't bump into sexy artists in Wiltshire. I can't remember the hotel we went to. It began with T, I think. Or it could have been the something. It was nice, though. Like a Hilton. And there were chocolates on the pillow. I ate them all and he didn't mind. And then he kissed me, and I kissed him, and we did everything. Twice. And I lay there thinking, this is one of those perfect moments I'll remember forever. Me, in New York, with an artist called Michel. In Dean's old bedroom, Hayley snapped her 10-year diary closed. She'd read enough. The memories were good, but the feeling they left her with didn't feel nice. It felt dirty. She pushed the diary onto the bookshelf between a Jill Mansell and a Jilly Cooper. Not content with how it looked, she set a toy elephant and half a dozen fairground gonks in front of it. "Mom!" Angel called from the other bedroom. Hayley pushed 2 gonks closer together so the diary was no longer visible and checked how it looked. Obvious because of the furry guardians, or invisible? "Mom!" Angel called again. "Coming!" Hayley couldn't help the smile forming on her lips when she got to the other bedroom. Angel was diligently putting things inside her suitcase, her pigtails bouncing as she moved from drawers to case and back again in the smallest bedroom of the house. Angel turned, a thick dictionary in her hands. "I do have 23 kilos, right?" "Yes, but Angel, seriously? A dictionary?" It was a hardback. She could see Angel struggling to even hold it in one hand. The reply came quickly. "It's my favourite." Her daughter had a favourite dictionary. Why didn't she know this? It was a proud mother moment, despite how much it weighed. Hayley sat down on the edge of what had been her childhood bed. The duvet cover with swirls and graffiti logos on had long since been replaced by something clean-lined, neutral and perfectly prim. Ideal if ever the Queen or Mary Berry needed a bed for the night. They do have books in New York, you know. Hayley patted the duvet next to her. Angel put her hands on her hips and struck a surly pose. "Does that mean I can't take my favourite dictionary?" What did you say to moves like Beyoncé from a 9-year-old? "What if I want to know what sidewalk means?" You know what sidewalk means. "That's not the point." Angel stuck her head forward, like an ostrich getting interested in prey. "There'll be things in America I might not understand." "They speak English, Angel." American English is very different to British English. They practically never use a U in anything, and they prefer Z to S. See how much you know already? Hayley quipped. I need my dictionary. Angel pouted better than Naomi Campbell. Your British English dictionary? Angel let out a growl akin to an irritated beast on a nature documentary. Definitely more bear than ostrich. I bet you're taking that massive diary. The words pinched, but Hayley did her best not to let it show. The diary she'd just hidden was practically an undetonated grenade. She didn't know why she even kept it. Most entries these days were a couple of lines, sometimes only a few words. Angel's tooth came out when she ate the yellow Quality Street. Mother made another crack about single mothers. She'll be asking Denise Robertson to give me advice soon. Greg bought me a sausage roll from Greg's. It would be funny if he wasn't expecting his sausage to be rolling around somewhere near me in the trouser press. Hayley forced a smile. I'm not taking it. There was no way she could take it now. Angel plumped herself down onto the cover, crossing her legs underneath her body, in a show of flexibility to rival an experienced Pilates class attendee. You should get a new diary. What for? There's nothing wrong with the one I have. The one she hoped to God Angel hadn't been reading. Along with the random sentences of life events she'd been writing in there this year, there were 9 other years, including the very beginnings of Angel's existence. And it was those entries that were the most controversial, as well as being the most helpful when she'd been researching their upcoming trip. You should bring your ideas book then, the one with all your drawings and designs and the bits of material in, Angel suggested. Her ideas book. She'd had so few ideas lately, she turned the back of the book into notes for her party planning exploits. Most people wanted the packages set out on the website, but occasionally, every now and then, someone would ask for something a bit different, and then she pounced on it, like a hungry lion who'd been starved for an age. What would I need that for? She swallowed. To note down all those designs you give people. Angel smiled. Like that woman in McDonald's, imaginary scarves. She wafted a hand in the air. Berets and buckles. There's going to be so much inspiration in New York. Hayley smiled, enjoying Angel's enthusiasm. You're changing the subject, young lady, when we're meant to be getting ready for our trip. Hayley reached out her fingers and nudged Angel's ribs, tickling. Stop it! Angel squealed. Sorry, didn't hear that. Mom! Angel screeched, falling backwards on the bed and trying to get away from the attack. You'll make Nanny come up here, and you know she doesn't like to be interrupted when she's watching Coronation Street. Hayley removed her hands with the speed of a mousetrap mechanism. The last thing she needed was her mother on the warpath. Her eyes went from Angel to the thick book laying on the bed. She picked it up and opened it. Ah, here's a word I might need to get familiar with. Hayley cleared her throat. Bodega, a cellar or shop selling wine and food, especially in a Spanish-speaking country. Angel snapped the dictionary shut and claimed it back. I hope we're not going to spend all our time searching for fizzy white wine. No, once we've established our local cellar, we'll be loyal. Angel crossed her legs again, placing the dictionary in the middle of her lap and fixing her eyes on Hayley. Do you think Nanny will be okay on her own at Christmas? There was deep sincerity in the question. Angel loved Rita. She was the only other person who had always been there for her. And she had been there. In body, if not in spirit. Rita wasn't coming because she had a hospital appointment on Christmas Eve. She'd been waiting over 6 months to see one particular consultant about her ongoing arthritis that she didn't dare reschedule. Hayley felt guilty for 2 reasons. The first was that perhaps she should be here to take Rita to the appointment. And the second was that it had been a perfect excuse not to invite her on the trip. She swallowed as the last thought hit home. Hayley put her arm around her daughter and drew her into her body, kissing the top of her head. I think Nanny is going to be just fine on her own. Haven't you seen the salmon head in the freezer? And she's hidden Bendix at the back of the larder. Are those the minty dark chocolates? Yeah, the ones she usually keeps by the side of her chair under deep security at Christmas. If I have more than 3, they make my mouth spicy. Reasons Christmas is going to be better in New York, number 49. not having to share chocolates with Nanny. But we will have to share them with Uncle Dean, Vernon and Randy. Are you sure Randy's a dog? Yes. Angel paused. Well, I heard something barking in the background on Skype, and there was definitely a leather collar on the coat rack behind Uncle Dean. Hayley swallowed. Dogs are allergic to chocolate, she said quickly. Just like Nanny's allergic to clothes from the charity shop. Angel let out a sigh. Nanny's a good person. She's just different to you, that's all. That simple sentence from the lips of her offspring cut deep. Because it was the truth. Her mother wasn't an ogre. She hadn't beaten her or deprived her of material needs. She just hadn't ever been spontaneous with emotion. That didn't make her bad. They were just opposites. Sorry, Hayley said, in little more than a whisper. So, can I take my dictionary? Angel batted her eyelids up and down, poking out her bottom lip and looking suitably like a cast member of Annie. Hayley sighed. You can take the dictionary as long as you promise not to take that ancient old Christmas storybook. I can't take another year of Alfie falling into the toy maker every night for a week. She looked at Angel, waiting for her to relinquish the dictionary. Her daughter's face was expressionless. OK. OK? Hayley checked. Are you sure? This must be one special dictionary. The dictionary comes, and, for being an awesome mum, I think you should have some fizzy wine, Angel said, checking her watch. It's past 8 o'clock and it's nearly Christmas. Quick, where's the nearest bodega? Hayley smiled. Come on, it's late. Let's move the case off the bed and tuck you in. She strained to pick the case up lengthways, but managed to slide it down onto the floor without losing any contents or banging the floorboards too hard. It was a double Coronation Street night. When she straightened herself back up, Angel was slipping down under the covers, eyes wide open, with the first signs of sleep showing. She yawned. Time for sleep, Hayley said, brushing a hand over Angel's hair. I don't really mind if they don't have Yorkshire puddings in New York, you know, Angel said. Hayley looked at her daughter's expression. There was concern in her large blue eyes. She didn't want that. Whatever life threw at them, none of it should ever come to rest on Angel's shoulders. I have good news, Hayley smiled. Google tells me they do have them, and they're called popovers. Really? Angel looked less than convinced. Really. And the best news of all is, they sell them in a ready-made mix. Angel broke a smile then, and clenched her fingers into excited fists. Reasons Christmas is going to be better in New York, number 84. They have Yorkshire puddings. Hayley grinned. So, let's recap. We know what a bodega is, and we can probably pick up the Yorkshire pudding mix while we're getting the fizzy wine. Mum, Angel said, swiping a hand at Hayley's arm and laughing. She kept the smile going, but inhaled a long breath and watched the happy expression restored on her daughter's face. This trip was all about Angel, and she didn't even know it yet. Hayley leaned forward, kissing Angel's forehead. Go to sleep now. No reading up on George Washington or how many types of squirrel there are in Central Park. Only one. The grey squirrel, and they're in decline. Apparently. Hayley put a finger to her lips and Angel stopped talking. Time for sleep now. But tomorrow, I want to hear all about the little critters. Angel smiled. Night, Mum. Night, Miss Menzer. Hayley went to the door, turned off the light and stepped onto the landing. She waited a few seconds, just wanting to stay in this happy bubble before everything in their lives changed. And then she heard the softest of voices. Dear God, or Father Christmas, it doesn't matter which. If you're listening, I really, really want to find my dad. Chapter 4. St. Patrick's Hospital, Manhattan, USA. Oliver felt as if he had the contents of a toolbox in his mouth. Every single spanner and a dirty wrench. A horrid metallic taste tainted his tongue and the flesh on the inside of both cheeks. It was making him nauseous, as was the chattering machine next to the hospital bed that was recording every movement of his heart. All the doctors arriving en masse when he'd been admitted had since disappeared. He was prostrate on the bed, the sensation in his chest now nothing more than a numb ache. Clara tapping on her phone next to him. Worry was etched on her forehead. He couldn't be here anymore. He hated these places, and he needed to get back to work. Get to the bottom of all that was going on with Regis Software. He tried to move into a half-sitting position. "Oliver, don't you dare move. The nurse said you need to lie completely still." Clara clamped a hand to his forearm, dropping her phone into her lap. "I just need to see what this damn machine is saying, and then I can get out of here." He craned his neck. "What's it saying?" He tried to focus his eyes on the graph shapes appearing on the screen. "It's saying if you don't lie still, your personal assistant is going to get the meanest nurse she can find," Clara retorted. "Try to stay calm." "In this place? Are you kidding?" He flopped back down. He didn't need to read the graph to know what it was saying. Those humps and bumps, the lines rising and falling. They only meant one thing: heart attack. He knew without any shadow of a doubt. It was his destiny. It wasn't a case of if, but when. It was genetic, written in family history. This was what the male Drummonds had in their future: heart problems and eventually, death. That realization weighed on his shoulders like an unmovable snowdrift. Maybe this year was it for him. Time out, nothing else, not even making 30. Like his brother. "It's not a heart attack." Now his PA was apparently a mind reader, although clearly no physician. Oliver stared up at the ceiling, looking into the pattern of the off-white tiles, a string of cheap silver tinsel hanging lamely from one crack. It looked like someone hated Christmas just as much as he did. He wasn't going to meet Clara's eyes. The woman was just trying to keep his spirits up. That's all people knew how to do in situations like this. She knew his family story. She knew the inevitable ending. His tightened chest had definitely slackened slightly, but it wouldn't stay that way. It would take him over again when he wasn't ready. Another time, another place. "When my first husband had his first heart attack, he turned the colour of a well-ripened plum. Then, when he hit the floor, he was paler than a hockey mask." Oliver swallowed away a sick feeling burning his stomach. He wasn't sure he wanted to hear this. "His second heart attack was different. Sweating, confusion. He said it was like having a wrecking ball on his chest." "Was there a third?" Clara nodded. "Oh yes, the third one killed him." He'd heard all he needed to. There was no escape from this death sentence, and now he just wanted out of here. He began ripping the monitors off his chest and flailing up to a sitting position. "Don't tell me any more." "Oliver, put those back on." "I can't be here." He was just pulling the very last round sucker from his chest when the door opened and a dark-haired woman wearing a white coat and carrying a clipboard entered the room. She was beautiful, Asian colouring, cat-like eyes, full lips. Oliver toyed with the sticker in his hand, like a kid being caught with his hand in the candy jar. "Mr. Drummond, sorry I was called away." She looked at his fingers holding the sensor that was supposed to be flat on his chest. "I see you got impatient." The corners of her mouth lifted in a wry smile. He watched her walk confidently to the machine. She pressed some buttons and began making notes on her chart. "I'm sorry, Doctor. I told him to keep still, but he isn't the best at following instructions." Clara spoke up. The doctor finished writing before looking up, smiling at Clara and clicking off her pen. "I have a lot of patients like that." She looked at Oliver. "Nearly all of them male." He swallowed. This was a woman in control. It was intoxicating, and for a second, he felt completely disarmed. He needed to find his rhythm here. He gripped the buttons of his shirt and began to fasten them together. He was still here, alive. His heart hadn't beaten him in this round, and he wasn't going to be throwing in the towel that easily. It was just like NFL. He'd never stopped giving his all for that. He needed to remember that feeling. He set his hazel eyes on her. "So, what's the verdict, Doctor? Am I going to be well enough to take you out to dinner tonight?" And there he was, back in the game. There was amusement in her expression, as a smile reached her lips, a glint of acknowledgement in her eyes. "For God's sake, Oliver!" Clara exhaled a breath of annoyance. The doctor's eyes looked him up and down, from his leather shoes, up through his designer trousers to the tailored shirt he was just finishing doing up. You had a panic attack. Her words crushed his libido like a snowplow clearing the streets. He was shaking his head without even knowing it. A panic attack? Panic. Weak. Desperate. Small penis. But just what was he thinking here? This was a good thing. It wasn't a heart attack. This was great. He blew out a breath. Your symptoms are a classic case of hyperventilation, the doctor continued. No. Oliver shook his head. It may not be a heart attack, but he was damn sure it wasn't panic either. Panic wasn't in the Drummond nature. It wasn't like that at all, he looked to Clara. I wasn't gasping for breath like some sort of asthmatic, and I wasn't panicked. Mr. Drummond, it isn't like most people think. Hyperventilation is a complex reaction the body makes when it needs to try to get you to slow everything down. He shook his head again. This did not compute. Whatever had happened was everything to do with his family history, and nothing to do with being a lightweight. I don't do slowing down, Doctor. He scrutinized the identity badge hanging from a lanyard around her neck. Dr. Khan, I run a global business. Oliver! Clara had her calming voice on now. It was the tone she used when she thought he'd gone too far in a meeting, when he'd made one heated comment too many. Well, he hadn't in this case. He wasn't going to listen to some junior doctor tell him the pain in his collapse was due to something excited teenagers got at a Taylor Swift concert. Mr. Drummond, I can only imagine the sort of pressure you're under at work. People in your position, under that amount of stress on a regular basis, you're susceptible to all kinds of health issues that aren't always immediately apparent. She might be beautiful, but he wasn't going to let her tell him this was to do with panicking. He'd never panicked in his life. He wasn't even sure he knew how to do it. You're aware of my family history? Yes, I did a quick review of your file. Would you like me to... He cut her off. You're sure it wasn't a heart attack? It wasn't a question so much as a statement. The doctor nodded. Your blood pressure is slightly elevated, but everything else is completely as it should be. For a complete peace of mind, my suggestion would be to... He raised himself off the bed, standing to his full 6 feet, and picking his tie from the counter. Thank you. But if I'm not dying today, then I think we're done here. He smiled at Dr. Khan, regaining his composure and control, before dipping a hand into the pocket of his trousers. My card, he said, offering it to her. If you want to take me up on the dinner offer. He could almost feel Clara raise her eyes to heaven. Chapter 5. Mancini's Restaurant, 10th Avenue, Manhattan, USA. When you'd had your life flash in front of your eyes, everything was magnified. The times this had happened, Oliver could only count on one hand. But he knew there would be more to come. It was as inevitable as Christmas and the start of a new year. But for now, in this moment, there was simply clarity. It was a chance to take stock, to reevaluate, every encounter enhanced. Oliver raised the delicate stemmed wine glass to his nose and savoured the aroma of the Merlot within. Oak, deep dark berries aged to perfection, the most expensive red wine they had on the list. He closed his eyes and put the rim of the glass to his mouth. He let the wine touch his lips first, before opening them up and allowing the liquid to reach his tongue. It was smooth, dense, like a velvet wrap had coiled itself around the flesh. He finally swallowed the wine and replaced the glass on the table, surveying the rest of the restaurant. It was full, and from his vantage point, he could see people being turned away at the front door. That's what his status in the business community had bought him. A regular table at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the area from just a phone call, no matter how late. Except he was alone. He'd called Tony, asked if he wanted to continue where they'd left off the night before. But apparently his invitation wasn't quite as tempting as a night with a Polish girl called Erica. He didn't blame his friend. Hell, if Dr. Khan had taken him up on his dinner offer, he wouldn't have called Tony in the first place. Oliver looked out of the window, half hidden by the heavy gold-flecked curtains and a string of expensive-looking Christmas bells. The snow was coming down faster now, and, as the temperature dropped, It was starting to layer up on the sidewalk. A couple wrapped up in scarves, hats and gloves came into view. The woman, dark hair flying out from under her hat, screamed as the man hit her with a snowball. Their forms bobbed and swayed in front of the red and green lights of a flashing Christmas tree on the adjacent building. Oliver watched the woman bend to the ground and start to gather as much powdery white stuff as she could scrape up to counter his attack. She threw, but her aim was off, and the ball hit the windscreen of a parked car. Shrieking as her partner chased her again, they ran off up the road. He was still watching the situation play out when he heard someone clear their throat. Oliver turned his attention back to the restaurant and looked up to see a waiter stood next to him, dressed in the Mancini's uniform of cream tuxedo with a maroon waistcoat and matching bow tie. "I apologize for disturbing you, Mr. Drummond, but I wondered if anyone was joining you for dinner tonight?" the waiter asked. Oliver nodded his head. Yes, that was exactly what he needed to get over the earlier hospital drama. His mind wandered back to Dr. Khan. She had virtually prescribed stress relief. Maybe it was time to follow the doctor's orders. "Absolutely, Rico." Oliver let his eyes roam around the restaurant, falling on the other patrons. He looked away from the couples holding hands across the table, the businessmen, the over-40s. Who was left? There was a group of 4 women, half a dozen tables away from him, 2 blondes and 2 brunettes. They weren't too loud. They hadn't started eating yet, and each of them was impeccably dressed. Then he spotted her, sitting at a table in the very corner of the room, just close enough for him to see everything he needed to see. Hair the colour of honey, fingers wrapped around a glass of white wine, black day-to-night dress. "Rico, send a glass of your best champagne to the lady over there, and ask her if she'd care to join me." He nodded in the direction of the corner table. "Yes, sir." Before the waiter turned to depart, Oliver spoke again. "And Rico?" "Yes, Mr. Drummond?" "We'll both have the salmon." "Very good, sir." Oliver sat back in his chair, took another sip of wine, and waited to see what would happen. He didn't really need to watch. He was certain of the outcome. After all, what woman would refuse free champagne and the opportunity to dine with a billionaire? His chest creased suddenly, making him sit a little uneasy. Straight away, the fear flooded his every part. He swallowed, trying to home in on the background music of instrumental Christmas schmaltz he couldn't stand. It wasn't working, and he could feel his head starting to throb. No, this was not happening. He wasn't going to give in to it, no matter what it was. "It's a heart attack. Your number is up. You're going to die." He shook his head, trying to dislodge his subconscious. The beautiful doctor's diagnosis began to run over his mind again, as he tried to focus on Rico approaching the honey blonde with a glass of champagne on a silver tray. He didn't have time for stress or death. He had to fight, not give up, like his father and brother had done. Oliver pulled in his stomach and sat up in his chair, ignoring the twinge in his pectoral muscles. He watched the woman accept the glass the waiter was offering and seek him out. She raised the glass a little, a bashful smile on her lips. He swallowed down the pain. He wasn't going to let it get in the way of his evening. He was in. Her name was Krista. She was in New York for 2 nights, and this was the second of them. It was perfect. She was staying at the Bryant Park Hotel. Her boss had reserved the table, and she was visiting for a conference. She was in cosmetics, nail polishes and something called acrylics for a national company named Cuticle. She talked a lot, and after her 3rd glass of champagne, her Idaho accent really came out. She was just the sort of distraction he'd needed. "Sorry, Oliver, I'm boring you. You don't want to hear about French manicures and the latest in gelish." Krista put a glass down on the table, nearly toppling it over in her haste. "I never knew it was so complicated," he responded. "But I have to admit, if we're really being honest here, nails aren't the first thing that attracts me to a woman." He kept his eyes on her, and was rewarded with her gaze and a soft smile taking over her mouth. "Is that so?" She placed her hand on the table, smoothing the linen cloth with her fingers. "Are you going to tell me what is the first thing that attracts you?" She looked coy now, and it was relaxing him. He leaned forward a little. "Well, Krista, what do you think it is?" He was teasing, and from the look on her face, she was enjoying every minute of it. Is it a smile? She guessed. Maybe the eyes. He waited a few beats, carefully filling her glass up with champagne. No. He shook his head, a smile playing on his lips. Do you have a thing for blondes? Krista picked up her glass, took a sip of the liquid inside. He shook his head, sat back in his seat, his eyes still fixed on her. This was the part he liked best. The questioning, the innocent expectation, the not knowing what was going to happen next. He was as exhilarated here as he used to be on the football field, as he sometimes was when he was closing a deal at Drummond Global. He'd not closed many of those recently. He drummed his fingers on the table, pushing the negative thought away. This was his time. Here was where he did his living, with no boundaries. Here, his short life expectancy just didn't exist. He moved a little closer. It's an aura, he said, in no more than a whisper. He could see she was transfixed, almost hypnotized by the sound of his voice. Her right elbow was resting on the table, her hand at one of her small, gold, heart-shaped earrings. He didn't feel guilty about the little white lie. After all, she was going to get as much out of this as him, if not more. An aura? She repeated softly. He nodded, leaning into the table, sliding his hand past the condiments. His fingers were a mere inches away from hers now. And then Krista laughed, the sound erupting loud and hard. That's so funny! She sipped at her wine, a little spilling over her lips. An aura! She returned the glass to the linen cloth and banged the flat of her hand down on the table. He was thrown just for a split second. This usually got them every time, whether they really believed it or not. She was supposed to be flattered, feel special. He had to turn this around. He smiled. What? You don't think it's true? He eked out a small laugh of his own. You think I spin this sort of line to every woman I meet? I'm not dumb enough to think otherwise, Krista said, swigging more champagne. But she put her glass back down on the table and inched her fingers closer to his. I don't really mind. Oliver wasn't sure about this change in proceedings. He was always the one in charge, the one calling the shots. He didn't know how he felt about Krista making the first move. He widened his smile. It was time to make his move. He made the connection, slipping his fingers in between hers and linking them tight. He heard a small gasp leave her lips. It was time. Make a wish, he whispered, his eyes demanding attention from hers. What? He could see the breath was catching in her throat, her chest rising and falling so softly it was barely moving at all. He wet his lips before continuing. If you could have one wish, right now, tonight, what would it be? A titter of a laugh escaped from her, and he could tell there was nervous excitement behind the logical part of her that was trying to say this was madness. You're crazy, she responded. Make a wish, Krista. If money were no object. He squeezed her hands. If you could do one thing, go to one place, something you've always dreamed of, what would it be? She shook her head then, the honey blonde waves shimmering in the half-light. You are certifiable. I'm serious, he said. She smiled, shaking her head once more. Well, in that case, I've never been in a helicopter, and I've always wanted to see New York from the air, like in the movies. A result. Slowly, he slipped his hand into the pocket inside his jacket and drew out his cell phone. Finish your champagne, and I'll make the call. She almost dropped the glass to the floor. Krista's screams as the helicopter dipped down over the city were like food to his soul. She was clutching his arm so tightly, it felt like the bone was turning numb. But despite the vice-like grip on his limb, the pain in his chest had gone. Even as he thought about it, nothing happened. No twinges, no aches, nothing. It was like he was free from it all. That's what happened when you lived in the moment. You could almost forget everything else. Krista's eyes were on stalks, watching the sparkling lights of the Empire State Building, the Chrysler Building and Trump Towers, as they flew around the boroughs. The Empire State, one of the 7 wonders of the modern world. Its iconic Art Deco style, tapering up to almost meet them in the sky, never failed to impress at night, particularly from their vantage point. circling some of the most well-known buildings in the city, almost close enough to touch. He could see how it made Krista feel. He knew she was experiencing something she'd always wanted to do, a life's dream. Because of him. That meant something. It was one wish she would never forget making, because it had come true. "This is amazing!" Krista shouted above the roar of the engine. Oliver nodded his head, took her hand from his arm, and linked their hands together. "So, what do you want to do next?" She turned her head away from the cityscape for a moment and directed her gaze at him. Smiling, she replied, "I think I'd like you to see the inside of my hotel room." "I thought you'd never ask," he answered, edging towards her. Chapter 6. Heathrow Airport, London, UK. "Is Dean meeting you at the airport?" Rita asked, shaking a fisherman's friend into her hand before popping it into her mouth. "I don't know yet," Hayley said, pushing the cases a few more inches in the queue for check-in. "What? You've not arranged it?" Rita's voice was shrill. "You're going to be arriving at night. You have to have someone waiting for you." "I just didn't want to bother him straight away when we can easily get a cab." They were going to be staying with Dean. His large, expensive, beautifully decorated bachelor pad was going to be their home for the holidays. Without this offer, there was no way this trip would be affordable. But the truth was, as soon as Hayley started asking more of her brother, he would give it and then some. Dean was generous to a fault, and the whole trip would be taken completely out of her hands. She didn't want that. This was her and Angel's adventure, even if it had to take place on a shoestring budget. "A cab?" Rita said the word like it would be driven by the leader of a terrorist organisation. "Yes, Mum. And it will be fine. It will be just like the one we used to get here, only smaller and yellow, probably driven by someone who talks more Brooklyn than Billericay." "But why would you do that?" Rita continued. This was why she'd wanted to leave her mother back in Wiltshire. A pleasant goodbye at the broken gate, air kisses and hugs neither of them really meant, then away. Liberty. That sounded mean. Hayley swallowed and offered her mother a smile, deciding to change tack. "Angel, do you have any more George Washington facts you'd like to share from your special dictionary?" "He was born in Virginia and he didn't have any children," Angel said, thumbing the pages. "I expect Dean has company cars at his disposal. He needn't come in person." Rita unzipped her patchwork leather handbag. "I'll give him a call." "No." Hayley surprised herself with the volume of her voice. She put her lips back together and tried to subconsciously tell her body not to let the colour red she felt hit her cheeks. The couple in front of them did a surreptitious glance backwards. There was only one thing for it. "Sorry." She let out a breath. "Sorry, Mum, I shouldn't have shouted. It's just we're running a bit late and flying is so stressful." Rita screwed up her nose. "I don't know what's stressful about sitting doing nothing but watch television for 8 hours." The sentence, "well, you should know," was at Hayley's lips, but she pressed them shut and said nothing. After all, her mother thought this was just a Christmas trip, a few weeks in the Big Apple and then home again. Rita knew nothing of the mission or Hayley's crazy dream, the itch that New York could be an opportunity, not just a vacation. Unless her mother had been reading her 10-year diary. She shuddered. If that ever happened, she'd be booking a one-way ticket around the world and never coming back. She was starting to regret not bringing it with her. She only hoped the cheap, ugly toys would do their job and keep it from being found. There would be no stopping the flipping of pages if Rita discovered it. There was no such thing as privacy where her mother was concerned. Your business was her business, but only because she wanted to have an opinion on it, not because she actually cared. Angel piped up. "Actually, the flight time is 7.5 hours, and one of the films is Alvin and the Chipmunks." "Great," Hayley said. "Annoying singing rodents. That should pass the time and soothe the stress right out of everybody." "Anyone would think you're not looking forward to this holiday," Rita said. She was obviously making too much out of this, and her mother's relentless questioning wasn't helping. She had to make it out of the country without a whiff of anything other than happy holidays plans. "Don't be silly. Of course I'm looking forward to it. It's snowing there, isn't it, Angel?" Hayley grinned at her daughter. "Yes, -4 degrees and set to get so cold you could throw a pan of boiling water in the air and watch it turn to snow before your eyes. I'm not sure throwing pans of hot water around is something to be encouraged, Rita said seriously, directing her gaze at Hayley. It's all over the TV, Angel said. So is that awful woman who sings about snakes, and that's definitely not a good thing. Hayley furrowed her brow at her mother. Do you mean Nicki Minaj? She shuddered again. Because I hate to tell you this, but she's not actually singing about snakes. Did you know snakes don't have eyelids? Angel asked, hugging her dictionary to her chest. How did a conversation about snow turn into this? Hayley looked desperately at the rows of people ahead of her. And why won't this bloody queue move? If you're getting anxious here, you wait until you see the queues for taxis at JFK, Rita said. Hayley spoke through gritted teeth. I have been to New York before. Rita shot her a look. How could I forget? Hayley swallowed and moved her eyes to Angel, who was regarding them both, sensing the atmosphere but not knowing the cause. You're right, Hayley said quickly, but we're British. We're experts at queuing and waiting our turn. If all else fails, I'll act all foppish and bumbling like Hugh Grant and wait for someone to take pity on us. Angel let out a tinkle of a laugh, while Rita just continued to look sour. Only Hayley knew the puckered lips were all for her and nothing to do with the fisherman's friend. Mum, we're going to have to go through security because we have a gate allocated already. Hayley watched Rita fuss around Angel. The hair was being pressed into place. The red coat, still a bone of contention for her mother, was being fastened up tight, her cheeks cupped, kind words expressed. Now, Rita started, remember to look both ways very carefully when you cross the road because they drive on the right. Yes, Nanny, Angel said with sincerity. And don't have a hot dog from one of those street vendors on the corner of everywhere. There's a reason they don't have a shop. Yes, Nanny. Hayley immediately craved the biggest hot dog they could find from the grungiest-looking guy the second they got there. We have to go. All right, Rita barked. Can't I have 5 minutes to say goodbye to my granddaughter? And your daughter? Hayley chewed her lip and tried to dismiss the words that bit. It was good Rita cared so much about Angel. She checked her watch again. I hope your hospital appointment goes okay, Nanny, Angel said. Rita will be fine. A neighbour was going with her to the hospital, and she had a year's supply of after-dinner mints and an Arctic roll. Rita and I will have a pensioner's lunch at the coffee shop there. She put her hands on Angel's shoulders. Don't forget to give your Uncle Dean a kiss from me, and tell him how much I miss him. The golden child. The one she put up on a pedestal as high as the Chrysler Building. Hayley cleared her throat, hoping to dislodge the bad feeling. I hope you have a lovely Christmas, Nanny. I'll call you, Angel said, smiling at her grandmother. Oh, don't you worry about me, Angel. I'll have one of those meals for widows and single people from Marks and Spencer. Hayley closed her eyes. If she mentioned getting out the electric fan heater or watching Pollyanna, she was seriously going to lose it. Right then, off we go, Hayley said, pulling Angel towards her by the fabric hook on the back of her rucksack. Bye, Nanny, Angel chirped. Hayley felt her mother's eyes on her, but didn't know what to do. Hugging always felt so awkward, and air kissing was even worse. Guilt was now winning out over everything else. Bye, Mum. Happy holidays, as they say in New York. Hayley stepped forward, ready to embrace her mother with everything she had. Instead, she impacted on Rita's foot. The noise that came from her mother's mouth was akin to a cat having its tail trodden on. A yelp and a stagger had Angel rushing to her grandmother's side. Sorry, Hayley breathed. Sorry, Mum. Are you all right, Nanny? Angel asked, concern etched on her features. Yes. Rita let out a jagged breath. Nothing the chiropodist can't fix, I don't expect. Hayley didn't dare move her feet a second time. Well, if you're sure you can make it back to wait for the taxi driver, then we'll head off. They really couldn't wait any longer, and the emotion just wasn't coming. Bye, Nanny, Angel said again. Hayley put her arm around her daughter and, drawing her close, she simply waved a hand. Chapter 7. Drummond Global Offices, downtown Manhattan, USA. Good morning, Mr. Drummond. It wasn't a good morning. He felt like shit. Krista had turned out to be the most insatiable woman he had bedded in over a month. His mouth was dry, not only from the champagne, but also from the humidity of the hotel room heating she insisted on turning up to stimulate the temperature of a rainforest. That had been just one of the fantasies she'd wanted to act out. Some of the others involved food from the room service menu he never wanted to see again. He forced a smile at the blonde receptionist and noticed for the first time that she wore glasses. Did he know her name? Had they dated? He wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer to that last question. Good morning, he responded, heading for the bank of lifts. As he waited for one to arrive, he looked through the glass doors to the street outside. The snow had stopped overnight, and only a fine dusting remained. It was business as usual on the street. Taxis, bike couriers, shoppers, workers, guys on roller skates like they were auditioning for Starlight Express. Icicles hung from the building signs. There was a glaze of frost on fire hydrants and lampposts, and the corners of the billboards were streaked with a sprinkling of white. The bell chimed, and the silver metal doors slid open. He stepped inside and hit the button for the 80th floor. It struck him then, as the elevator began to rise, that he had no idea what was in his schedule for the day. How had that happened? Maybe Clara was right. Had he dropped the ball lately? He checked his watch. It was a little after 9. He hoped there was nothing for at least an hour, or he might have to send out for mouthwash. The elevator finally came to a stop, and when the doors opened, there was Clara. She was wearing maroon, another statement necklace at her throat, but the expression on her face was one of concern. Good morning, Clara, he stated hesitantly. We have a problem, his PA said without prelude. Have you called Mackenzie? He asked, beginning to walk along the corridor towards his office. It isn't a legal problem, Clara said. It's... He interrupted her. I didn't have a 9 o'clock appointment, did I? He powered on past the other offices, towards his room at the very end of the walkway. No, but Oliver, wait, listen to me before you go in there. Clara rasped as she broke into a jog, chasing him. He put his hand on the door but stopped, turning to look at his assistant. Her face was the colour of an overripe strawberry, and there were beads of perspiration above the beads of the necklace. Your mother is in there, Clara whispered, pointing at the office door. He creased up his face in the hope his ears were as dry and deficient as his throat. Sorry, Clara, could you say that again? Your mother is in your office, she repeated. It was his turn to perspire. He could feel the collar of his shirt getting a little tight, his body reacting to the statement in the way it always did where his mother was concerned lately. He wanted to run, or at least turn on his heel, and head back down the corridor to the bank of elevators. He could call Tony. They could head out to play golf, blast away his hangover and his worries on the fairway, spend a couple of hours in the 19th hole. He blinked, coming back to reality. What do we do? The words were out of his mouth before he thought about how infantile he sounded. What do we do, Oliver? I told you this would happen if you kept ignoring her calls. Clara was gesticulating at him, her hands flying about to get her point across, like a desperate shadow puppet act. And she was right, of course. She had warned him several times that if he didn't call his mother back, she would turn up at his penthouse or here. And there wasn't a lot he could do about it. He might control the company, but she was also a member of the board. This was as much her building as it was his. But he knew already her visit wasn't about the business. No, this was definitely personal. He inhaled a long breath and put his hand to the tie at his throat, straightening it, ensuring it gave away nothing about the night before. Straight away, the twinging in his chest began. He almost welcomed it. If the Grim Reaper took him now, he wouldn't have to deal with this conversation. He closed his eyes, holding his form steady. Make us some coffee, Clara. I've got this. And then he just stood, his hand on the door, listening to Clara's dull footsteps on the carpet as she powered off to arrange the drinks. He was making far too much of this. It was his mother. He loved his mother very much. He pushed the handle down and opened the door. Stepping into the room, he He watched her stand from the seat opposite his desk. He took in the black patent court shoes, the bright orange designer shift dress, the matching wool jacket over it, and her perfectly coiffured blonde hair. Nothing out of place. Cynthia Drummond was 55, but still looked mid-40s. "Mom," he greeted, striding across the floor towards her, arms open. He embraced her fully, letting her hug his body to hers like she always did. He drew away first. "This is a surprise. You should have told me you were coming. I would have been more organised," Oliver said, moving behind his desk and sitting down. He picked up his pen and rubbed his thumb over the barrel. "Nonsense, Oliver. You would have found a reason not to be here," Cynthia said, sitting back down and picking her Gucci handbag up off the floor. She placed it on her lap. He let out a laugh. "I wouldn't have done that." The words came out a little too quickly. "You've been avoiding my calls," Cynthia carried on. The second she said the sentence, all he could see were the pile of yellow notes Clara had been sticking to his desk for the past couple of weeks. He swallowed. "It's been very full on here, and—" Cynthia cut him off. "I know what this is about, Oliver. It's what it's always about." It didn't sound like she required him to give an answer. He sat still, his thumb working overtime on the pen until it started to hurt. "It's December, isn't it? You're always like this in December," Cynthia said. It didn't sound like she wanted to be interrupted. He put the pen down on the desk and picked up his baseball stress ball, squeezing it in his palm. "I don't know what you mean." "One word." She paused for breath before continuing. "Christmas."